Hey guys, it's Ornlu, and I'm here with a very special video. This is going to be an interview with two of the developers for the Last Chieftains DLC here for AoE2. This is going to be TriRem and Lord Basse. So, guys, why don't you just introduce yourselves and what the heck do you have to do with this expansion? I can start here with TriRem.
Hello, I'm Tristan, also known as TriRem. I'm one of the designers for Forgotten Empires, and worked on the DLC for the Last Chieftains, mainly on the civilizations themselves.
And I am Sebasthian, also known as Lord Basse on the forums, and from various custom campaign projects over the years. And I am the narrative lead for the Age of Empires 2 DLCs at the moment. So I basically come up with stories and characters and work together with a small team to take these historical figures and turn them into something that fits in a Age of Empires setting. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. Really looking forward to being able to do this interview. And I think a lot of people are going to want to know the sorts of ins and outs of the DLC. So before we even get into the specifics, why South America? What would be the design space that's appealing here for an expansion, making one for AoE to start with TriRem?
Well, I think the main thing with South America, in the thing we're looking for when planning a new DLC is where else can we go? What else can we explore that hasn't been done before? Where is there space to tell interesting stories, showcase interesting cultures and civilizations? And I mean, you just look at the world map, and South America was just a prime example of there's so much we could do here, so much we can showcase, and it became quite natural that there was so many different elements of new and interesting civilizations that were not showcased anywhere. And we also had the existing Incas that were in the game already as the single civilization from that area. But it was represented with a lot of shortcomings and borrowing a lot from the Mesoamerica. So the Central America parts with the eagles and the architecture, all of these were fine to have a civilization like 13 years ago, but now with the standards we've established, we thought there was a lot of space to do the Incas justice, but also all the civilization in that area that were basically non-existent until now. And we decided, to go with the South America and go with like some really cool and really interesting civilization from that area.
Cool. So, Sebasthian, when it comes to just even the concept of a DLC, how can we make a good campaign out of these civilizations factor into the decision of how you want to narrow down your focus? Because obviously you could have chosen any number of South American polities and civilizations.
It factors in to some extent. I think we try to capture as broad of a as broad of a area as possible and kind of cast wide nets, and also just figure out which were the most influential in the time period and how can we kind of balance the picks we make, basically. And then you can pretty much always find someone or a group of individuals to create a story around. I feel like for the Mapuche, especially, the choice was pretty obvious, which we'll get to later.
Yes.
Some other cases it was a bit more tricky because there just isn't that much so many written records from the time or even later, at least available in English. There were some in the local languages, Spanish and Portuguese, but it does make for a quite different challenge compared to some of the other DLCs where we have a wealth of knowledge. Basically anything in Europe or Asia is pretty easy by comparison. South America was a different challenge, but I think it turned out really well.
Yeah, as a student of history myself, you got to appreciate that you guys chose a hard mode when it came to trying to find the not just campaigns, but even designing civilizations, as written records are more difficult to come by, and how can you do respect to these people and their histories while still creating a cohesive gaming experience? The next question then, Tristan, what made you want to gravitate towards these three civs specifically, the Muisca, the Mapuche, and the Tupi?
So for the civilizations, we kind of, when we make a DLC, we want to showcase the more, it's a balancing act. We want to obviously showcase the most important like groups of people of the area, the most important civilizations, but we also want to have a diversity in terms of the identities that we have. Pretty quickly, we had so when we started looking into those, we like obviously made a list of all the possible candidates that we could have, and there were some really strong candidates like right off the bat as soon as we started looking into a bit of the history and what kind of designs we could do with those. The Muisca were quite unique with like their riches, their religion. There was a lot of like unique elements that we could represent in the game. So Muisca were very quickly one of the top candidates. Mapuche also, I mean, the campaign writes itself, and their unique adaptations to European warfare, the use of cavalry. Immediately, this was the one civilization where like we can do something that is completely new and completely not done before. We can have an American civilization that has cavalry, and that was immediately a topic as well, just for that aspect alone. And then for the third civilization, it was a bit more of a research of like where we could go, and the Tupi were a pretty good candidate here to also cover a pretty broad area of like all the a large region in the Brazil side of the in the Amazons and all of that area. We wanted to have to not really leave any big area of South America unexplored. Like we knew we would never be able to showcase all the different civilizations of South America. That was obviously not going to be possible with only 3 picks. So the Tupi were a pretty good umbrella for all those regions that would not be covered by either the Mapuche or the Muisca. And they also had some really distinct adaptations to the specific warfare, and also their interactions with the European settlers were different from what we would see with the Muisca and the Mapuche. So there were definitely interesting characteristics to them that made them the kind of logical third choice for us.
Just as a follow-up to that, why 3 civilizations? Because in expansions, in the post-DE era, you've gone anywhere from 2 to 5 civilizations. So how do you land on that 3 number?
That will depend on the setting itself. It really depends on how much, how broad the history you're going to try to cover, how broad the geographical area is, how unexplored it is. So if you're doing something like Lords of the West or Dawn of the Dukes, you're like deep into European territories where already a lot of these is already explored. So 2 civilizations works pretty naturally. You don't really need to do too much more than that. Same with like the Caucasus. Armenians and Georgians were a pretty natural pairing. You could do enough with those. But then if you're trying to explore areas that are really that have been mostly overlooked until now, India for Dynasties of Indias, that one easily fits 3 civs on top of the Hindustanis. China, obviously with the 3 kingdoms, but also the Jurchen and Khitans. That was a lot of history we were trying to convey and explore. So for that one, we went with 5. And here, kind of same logic as what we did with basically Dynasties of India. We have one established civilization in the region, and then we're going to explore new areas with 3 new ones. And also, we decided to make a new architecture set for South America to kind of represent the unique styles of the area. And if we were going to do a new architecture set, it made sense to have at least 3 new civilizations to really showcase it and make it a great package for the player.
Well, I know that myself and many viewers and players are very grateful about the South American architecture set. I gotta say, I love all the visuals, so definitely looking forward to playing those in the campaigns, and of course, I already have seen them in the multiplayer maps as well, so that is going to be fun. So, Sebasthian, I mean, unfortunately, South American history is not very well known. People outside of South America. So, how is it that you create a campaign, you create these historical figures? How do you really bring these historical figures to light in a way that's approachable for the average player?
Difficult question. Well, that's.
What,
I
you thought
mean,
this would be a
there's,
puff piece?
yes. I thought it would just be yes and no questions here today. No, but I mean, we have a really good like research team at FE, people with like actual degrees in history, and I know that for the Tupi campaign, the like our head researcher, she actually translated one of the not thesis, but a like big historical report document about specifically Arariboia, the main character, which just was not available at all in English. So she like did that just so that we could get a deeper look into who was this guy, who was his like nemesis, the other characters around in the area they wanted to cover, and just get a more in-depth look at the events that took place around that time. Because if you look at the English sources that are available, which are quite scarce, at least in my experience, you get like a very general idea. A chieftain comes along, fights the Portuguese or fights with the Portuguese, and then he dies from plague, and that's about it. But if you go to the more local sources, you get a lot more detail, especially around that character and that whole history, which I found really fascinating. Like the interplay between like different colonial powers and different tribes fighting both against each other, and then like making alliances across cultural lines. And yeah, I think when you need to find that kind of angle to take, and then you just follow that. And I feel like the roles or the character portrayals kind of write themselves after a while. And then, yeah, it's a different story for every campaign. But I feel like with that one, we really had to dig deep. I think that's kind of the process we take with every campaign we come across. But every story is unique in its way, so we have to adapt it based on what we want to do.
And I guess just as something I've always wondered, what is the process for divvying up the campaigns, right? Because you usually have one person do each of the campaigns. Are you just like, oh, I want to do Lautaro, I want to do Arariboia? Is there a lottery system?
We did something like that in the past. Like I remember when I joined, that was at the like tail end of Lords of the West. And then for the Dawn of the Dukes, we had a very small campaign team, and we kind of picked one story each to do because that was the most like natural thing to do with such a small group. Nowadays, we have kind of expanded. Like we're working on more than just Age of Empires 2. We like worked on the Age of Mythology reboot, and we have our fingers everywhere. I feel like, not sure if that's a good expression to use, but you get my point.
We're using it.
The
tendrils of Forgotten Empires permeate the Age of Empires franchise.
We're involved in a lot of different areas, so we have a larger team, and that also means that we are able to kind of split up the different parts of creating a campaign amongst like several different people and like smaller teams. So now we actually have like I'm working on the narrative team, so I focus on like research, writing, character development, and that whole part. And then I'm much less involved in like sitting in the editor and doing that. But even then, like we have to find someone has to do the writing for this story, and someone else has to do it for this, and then we just kind of split it up based on. Sometimes it is just interest. What interests you most? Because a lot of the time, that's just a good way to see, to get invested and just get the best possible product out of it in the end.
With that, guys, let's jump into the civilizations and their corresponding campaigns themselves. So, Tristan, historically, what jumped out to you the most about the Mapuche? You mentioned the unique contact with the Europeans, and how does that lean into a unique archetype and play style?
It's basically the first thing you get when you start researching about Mapuche history. It's their great use of cavalry in their wars against the Spanish. So pretty immediately we were very much set on this is going to be the one American civ that has access to cavalry in some fashion. We didn't necessarily have a precise idea of like what exactly we were going to do with that, but the premise of the civilization was definitely going to be they're going to have cavalry available to them. And basically from that point, we looked more into their history, into more specifically their warfare, and see how we can extract something interesting out of it that will give them a unique angle for a civilization. What we landed on is so the Mapuche Wars were basically the Mapuche excelled at essentially a lot of skirmishing, a lot of raids, pillaging the Spanish settlements and all of these, and capturing a lot of their weapons, their horses, and basically essentially being like a major nuisance to the Spanish. So from that angle, what we get is a pretty big focus on counter units for them, on skirmishing, like it's in the name, so they're going to have good skirmishers. And more generally, their ability to really counter the Spanish and adapt to the warfare that the Spanish were bringing. There's some like really interesting historical documents that mention like how the Mapuche were really good at adopting even like Western traditions of like even like pikemen with like long spears, so almost like in the pike and shoot era of the warfare at that point. So with all of these, we're like, okay, they're gonna have what their main angle is gonna be is great counter units. They're gonna have good skirmisher, good spearmen, also slingers, and then we also bring in the cavalry that comes in later, as in the same way that their adoption of cavalry came in later in their history. And from that point, you have on Castle Age onwards, you have a couple of cavalry units that are available to you. Bolas were a pretty iconic weapon of the area, so the Bolas Rider was a pretty obvious pick. And likewise, we went with a melee cavalry to kind of complement the ranged cavalry they would have in the Kona. And then obviously, Mapuche would not be wearing as much armor as the Spanish, so it is more of a lighter medium cavalry unit, but is going to be devastating at picking off injured enemy in the same way that the Mapuche were able to really ambush and skirmish their way into basically centuries of warfare against the Spanish.
Yeah, so I want to dig a little deeper into these sorts of bonuses. So I get the whole counter units mentality. Okay, we're going to give them some cav options, some counter unit options. When you're researching the Mapuche historically and you're designing the civilization, how else have you tried to work in the history of the Mapuche into like specific bonuses for the Civ?
I mean, those are really the main elements. I mean, we can. There's also another element that we can bring up. It's also the settlements. As a regional building for all of the South American civilizations. That's not specific to the Mapuche, but it is something they have in common with all of them. With the settlements as this kind of bigger, more important drop sites that also has housing space, we were essentially trying to represent the kind of decentralized nature of all those civilizations that were less empires and more confederations of local tribes and local settlements in the different areas that would then come together to fight their common enemy. And for the Mapuche, that is also something that is very much valid. Butal Mapu, like the Imperial Age technology, specifically represents that aspect of like the confederations of the Mapuche coming together to fight off the Spanish. So having a settlement as a regional building was very much fitting for all of them, for those decentralized communities that would be gathered around one central building. Basically, each civilization that have access to settlements have their own name and their own version of it, but it is a similar concept. And with the Mapuche, they had a levy system to kind of like really quickly mobilize the men that were in fighting forces to really quickly go to war against their enemies. So that aspect is represented with the spearman line and skirmisher training in settlements to really have those quickly. You can really get an army out of basically nothing without having set up a lot of like military structures. So that is one element. The castles also being revealed on the map. That's also going to represent the more the intelligence that the Mapuche had over their own lands and be able to take advantage of the terrains against the Spanish. That also is another like historical elements that it gets blended into a gameplay bonus. So those are all different kind of ways we will pick and choose some salient elements of the civilization, some like cool aspect that isn't really present in another civ, and try to figure out, okay, how can we translate that into something that is gonna be fun and unique in terms of like an actual game.
And did you happen to dig up that specific Mapuche manuscript that they constructed large stone towers and placed cannons in them, unique from all of the other South American civilizations?
So I don't remember that's one specific manuscript, but
I'm
yes,
joking.
I mean the aspect of getting cannons, like the gunpowder, we kind of considered, are we going to give them like actual gunpowder or just represent it in a more limited way? Since they already were given cavalry, which is very much unlike other American civilizations, we decided to limit the scope on the gunpowder, even though they definitely used guns that were captured from the Spanish. So we put it, okay, they're going to have gunpowder, but only in the form of the Bomba Towers. That is like a nice historical nod that will set them apart, but it's not going to be an overbearing part of their identity. Cavalry is already a very good line for the Civ.
All right, well, great answers, and I think people are really getting a more fleshed out understanding of the Mapuche Civ. So, Sebasthian, thank you for your patience. Now to jump into Lautaro. Who the heck is this guy, and why is he a good campaign figure?
So Lautaro is probably one of the most famous character from the entire Arauco War and the like Chilean national epic La Araucana, which is like the source of inspiration for the campaign. We're not going to follow it like to the T because we have a much more compressed time frame, and we just have 5 scenarios. We don't have 22 or whatever we would need for to represent the entire story. But yeah, Lautaro, he is a young man. He is enslaved by the Spanish quite early on when he's a child, and he grows up to become one of the most important liberators of the Mapuche. He kind of escapes from servitude and ends up being one of the primary leaders of the resistance against Spanish. So just a really good, I mean, the story writes itself pretty much. He's just a really good protagonist. He has a really, I wouldn't say relatable. I haven't been in that situation myself, but you know, you can
Really?
immediately, no, not in this lifetime, you know. But I mean, you can immediately, how to say, empathize with his struggle and how he loses his parents. He is taken in as a slave by the very man who killed his parents, at least in our rendition. So there's a lot of just really pulling on the heartstrings, I guess, that you can do, and also fits quite well within like the historical context. So yeah, I feel like he's a really obvious pick for a candidate. And even if you haven't heard about the Mapuche or Lautaro or anything about South America, you can probably relate to him like being, I don't know, the
stalwart
South
resistance
American
fighter?
version of the resistance fighter, the William Wallace Braveheart type of guy. It's something that you can get into immediately.
You know, you obviously already have the Montezuma campaign for Native Americans resisting the Spanish. How does the experience the player will go through in Lautaro differ from what you get in Montezuma?
For one thing, you have a lot more unique characters. In Montezuma, you have like Montezuma, Cortez, and Cuauhtemoc, and that's about it. And Cuauhtemoc kind of comes in at the end, like he's revealed to be the narrator. And here you have a lot of like really memorable people, like Galvarino, the guy who has knives for hands because his hands were cut off. And instead of like giving up
Freddy
and
Krueger?
calling,
I don't think that's Galvarino.
that's the historical president, I guess. But yeah, he had his hands cut off by the Spanish because he resisted them. And instead of like giving up on life, he just said, no, not gonna do that. So tied 2 big knives to his hands and kept on fighting. And you also have like the character of Caupolicán, who is the big chieftain who ends up like giving over command of the Mapuche alliance to Lautaro, but he's like the first leader, and he continues being a very important character throughout the story. So I feel like the character focus is one of the things that's going to set it apart. The villain, Pedro de Valdivia, is also more fleshed out, I think, than Cortez, because Cortez in Montezuma, like it's told from the Aztec perspective, and they are viewed kind of like gods, which they kind of were, as far as I know, historically. But since this takes place quite a while after Montezuma, the news about the Spanish has already like seeped into like even the far reaches of South America. So people know kind of who these guys are. They know that they are not benevolent like saviors from another side of the planet or something. These are like bloodthirsty conquerors who are out for gold. So the again, the direction or the angle of attack you take on the story is quite different, because yeah, the threat is known, and it becomes quite quickly a story about just resisting, surviving, and outsmarting the conquerors.
Awesome. So last for Lautaro, is there anything that really sticks out in the gameplay elements of the campaign that you like, okay, we know that they're doing a lot of resisting. Can you expect a lot of skirmishes, a lot of like sort of spread out, smaller scale conflicts than huge battles? And is that something you tried to focus on, or did you want to take another direction?
You can expect a bit of both. Like there will be some skirmishes. There will be some like I guess guerrilla fighting, or inspired by like guerrilla fighting. Try to kind of translate that into the game, and you kind of building alliances and trying to rally various tribes from like all across the country or the land. So yeah, but there will be some bigger battles as well, like the Battle of Tucapel, which is probably the most famous that Lautaro took part in, where he led like about 50,000 soldiers or warriors against the Spanish. So there will be some like large scale battles as well as the like more guerrilla style fighting. And I think it's going to be quite an interesting mix that you're not gonna like just conquer the whole map every time like you would if you were doing like, I don't know, Genghis Khan or something, where you're playing as a conqueror. Here it's quite a different approach to the entire campaign.
But let's jump into the Tupi. So Tristan, historically, what jumped out the most to you for the Tupi, and how does that lean into the Civ's archetype of the Zerg of AoE2?
So for the Tupi, we have plenty of like unique elements to draw from them. One of the main constraints that basically comes up with the Tupi is the setting in which they were part of, between the rainforest and the coastal areas of Brazil. They had unique adaptations to the different climates that they were in, and with that, what we were able to kind of synthesize into gameplay was we're going to take an approach where, yes, obviously they're not going to have as much armor, they're not going to be as strong in like the head-to-head combat as the other civilizations, but what we can do is make sure that we level the playing field by leveraging their higher numbers and making them fierce in the nature of being very aggressive and very capable of fighting and outnumbering their opponents, which is what they were able to do when they were fighting the various European counterparts and colonizers that were arriving on their land. They were obviously in much greater numbers than those European settlers. So kind of trying to represent that aspect of the Tupi, which were less armored but much more numerous, and that's where they become really fearful. And we are able to have that in the design by making sure that this is a civilization that we want to be very aggressive. And then we start representing that with the various bonuses of they have cheaper military upgrades, so really represent a very martial society, and have the discounts on the return on the military dying. This is another aspect that we added to make the player engage with the nature of like a very aggressive civilization that seeks out engagements and that you want to use very aggressively. You want to pick smart fights against your opponents, and with every fight that you take, you know that you're always coming out on top because you're getting more resources out of it than your opponent is losing. So those are some of the main elements. And one last one that was a topic basically when researching the Tupi is the poison damage. That one is, if you ask anyone about like warfare in the Amazons or in that area, the first thing they would think of is poison with like whether it's arrows or any other type of projectiles. So we knew we were going to have a poison effect somewhere in that civilization. And then we just decided of whether we would be part of like the unique units or a unique technology. We opted for the latter. But that was always going to be one of the highlights of the civilization. And I think that's also something like most people have pointed out as something that is really striking for the civilization. Basically, the first thing you're going to think of when you think Tupi is, oh, they have poison on the archers. That's really scary. And I think we're pretty happy with the like a kind of splash that we made with that one.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who is a complete novice in knowing anything about the native South American cultures, I think of Tupi, I think of poison, and that it's definitely brought to life in the gameplay. Something that I noticed in sort of my deep dive that I did on the Tupi is that there's a lot of resource manipulation with this civ, which I thought was kind of an interesting direction to like take with a civilization. Just like from a pure gameplay design mechanics, you get extra starting resources, cheaper upgrades, and you get the return on fallen units. Was that like a conscious decision that you really want the player to be interacting with resources in a bit of a different way?
Yes, that was part of the drive to make the civilization stand out, but also standing out from the rest of the other South American civilizations by making sure that they get resources through different ways and able to spend it differently. As you mentioned, like the cheaper upgrades, but also getting military out on the field really effectively with the Blackwood Archer training in pairs. Those are all different elements. We're going to talk about the Muisca later, who focus on resources in a very different way with their wealth of gold. Basically, you're swimming in the gold and spending it on very expensive units. With Tupi, it's kind of the opposite approach. We gave them a bunch of like discounts, a bunch of ways to be very economical in how you get your resources and able to spend it on cheap units that are going to have strength through their numbers and then through also their later technology, such as the Curare technology for the poison, that is basically a game changer for the Tupi.
And last question for you, Tristan, on the Tupi. Is Curare overpowered? Because a lot of people are worried about this, and this video is going to go live the day after the DLC drops. So is it something that's going to need to be nerfed right away?
Putting me on the spot right there to give you an answer, so I can be wrong and everyone laugh at me. So Curare is a very interesting technology because it is, when you look at it, when you read it, it feels very impactful. It's like 5 extra damage on your Arbalaster. It's 3 extra damage on the Blackwood Archer. That sounds like it's completely overpowered. But the fact that it's coming over time, over a pretty long time, it's like 15 seconds, for the full damage to actually go through. A lot of the units kind of already die before all the damage is dealt. So when you do individual tests, you do like one Arbalaster attacking one Paladin, it feels a lot stronger than it actually is in practice. So I can totally understand why people are concerned that this might be completely overpowered. From our experience in practice, in actual games, it is not quite as impactful as it sounds, but if it is too strong, that is also a possibility, something we want to avoid, but is bound to happen when you make so much and we release so much content at once.
All right, I just thought that it is worth mentioning and worth bringing up because some people act like the sky is falling. My personal testing, it didn't really seem like crazy broken, so I just thought that it would be good to hear the devs' insights on that. But thanks, Tristan, of course, for that intro to the Tupi. And now, back to you, Sebasthian. This campaign is the Arariboia? How do you pronounce that?
I pronounce it as Arariboia.
Arariboia.
Probably not the proper Portuguese pronunciation or the Tupi pronunciation, but close enough.
All right. Well, for Arariboia, basically, same question. Who the heck is he, and why is he a compelling person to center a campaign around?
So Arariboia is one of many Tupi chieftains from the area. He is the founder of the city of Niterói, close to Rio de Janeiro. And he basically tried to keep his tribe alive, whatever the cost. That's his role in the story. So there are a lot of different characters who have like different approaches to how to deal with the invasion of the Europeans, the Spanish or the Portuguese in this case. And you can see that in this campaign where one of the villains is Kunambebe, who is a more of a hardliner. He doesn't want anything to do with the Europeans if we can avoid it. He tries to cast them out pretty much, while Arariboia kind of sees, okay, the tide is shifting. We're not gonna go back to the way things were, and we need to make basically the best of it, and I need to make sure that my tribe survives the coming storm, pretty much. So he is more of a he plays like realpolitik. He does the best with the options he's given. He tries not to be too ideological, I guess. Which kind of makes him an interesting character to follow as well, because he kind of becomes a political player or diplomatic player, and especially with Kunambebe being his nemesis and having a very different approach to the whole situation, it creates a very unique dynamic, I think, for a Age of Empires campaign, where you have multiple different factions and they are making alliances with each other across, like I mentioned before, cultural lines, because everyone has their own goal to achieve, and they don't always line up neatly the way you would expect. And Arariboia, he basically begins on a small island, and he and his tribe is cast out by Kunambebe, and then they're almost exterminated, and they have to get their footing back, and that's when he goes to the Portuguese, which he has a positive relationship with since before. And it's again kind of a comeback story. He loses almost everything at the start, and then he has to build himself up again and just ensure that his tribe survives no matter what happens. So I feel like he is quite an interesting guy to cover.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I'm, just running through the campaigns in my head here, it's we don't really have this, realpolitik, okay, lots of different shifting alliances, especially between very different cultures and whatnot. Usually when there's big cultural clashes, it's usually one obliterating the other in Age of Empires.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely an interesting direction to take with the campaign. And so how is it that you can use the Tupi civilization, who are all about being aggressive and swarming with numbers? How does that play into creating a compelling campaign experience if you're just going to be, losing tons of units, right? How do you make that fun for players?
I think that the Tupi civilization is just a lot of fun to play with. I mean, the Blackwood Archers, I was playing that Arariboia campaign just this morning, and I just had a lot of fun running around on the starting island with this mass of bowmen that just shoot projectiles really quickly. And you have the big chunky clubmen, the Ibarapema warriors, who are just a fun unit to play around with. So I mean, the Civ is already very good and interesting to play with, and you can get some really interesting matchups against the Portuguese and minor spoiler, the French, who show up later in the story. So it kind of becomes, or it can become, a game of just massing numbers against sometimes more powerful units like bombard cannons or whatever, which was also something that did kind of happen historically. You had huge armies or war bands, I guess is the proper term, going up against smaller numbers of better armed European colonizers. And you kind of get a bit of that in the campaign as well, but you do play from the Tupi perspective, and you're creating these huge masses of warriors that you can kind of just
overwhelm
your enemy with.
Yeah, I think that should be another pretty interesting dynamic. I mean, I'm just in my mind, I haven't played the campaigns yet because too much testing to do with these civilizations, but I can just imagine organ guns and just trying to overwhelm them with all of my many dudes. The Ibirapema warriors, they're a good strong frontline unit though, so that'll definitely for sure be an important aspect of the campaign. So I guess my final question here for the Arariboia campaign: what was especially interesting to design in terms of, okay, you have these different factions. From a gameplay perspective, how do you actually balance that and create a real gameplay experience? How do you translate the shifting dynamics into gameplay, I guess?
So I personally haven't been too involved in the editor, like I mentioned before. But one thing that the team did is that because you have this web of alliances, you have a European ally and a Tupi enemy, you kind of get this like your two armies combined becomes quite a unique fighting force, I would say. So yeah, you can do a lot of things there, like with different alliances, getting help from like other players, and kind of building up a unique way of confronting each obstacle you come across in every mission. And there's also just a lot of like in one of the missions where, without spoiling too much, you can like play around with some of the more some of the new unique editor units that we have created. I'm not going to spoil what it is exactly, but you'll get to that scenario.
All right. Well, looking forward to that campaign as well. Thank you, Sebasthian. One more round, guys. Tristan, we now have the Muisca. So you already mentioned the riches and the gold aspect. Is that what jumped out to you the most of the Muisca? And how does that lean into creating an actual AoE2 Civ?
With the Muisca, there's basically two things that really jumped out, and those are the two foundation blocks for the design that we went through with the civilization. It's the riches, the incredible riches of the Muisca with their gold, their precious stones, and also the religious aspect, the strong fervor and the importance of the religion in the civilization in general for their ruling class and basically all the people of the Muisca empires. From that point, basically all their bonuses and units go back to either one of these two elements. We have a lot of different aspects to emphasize the richness of the civilization with the gold discounts on the AJAPs. You have caravan and guilds that are free, all those pointing out to the richness of the empire itself, but also the trade that they establish with the different other civilizations, and also the gold lasting longer as a team bonus. All those different elements are really to really sell you on the aspect that, okay, this civilization is the foundation for the legend of El Dorado. This is from them that European colonizer in general got the idea that there must be a city just made out of gold somewhere, just because the Muisca were just that rich. So that's one of the main aspects of the civilization, and then the other is the religious aspect. And we have that in many different ways. In monk bonuses, regaining faith faster, that just really solidifies their identity as a monk civilization. But it also is represented through their unique units. We have the Getcha warrior. When we looked into the Getcha, one of the really cool aspects of them was that they would bring mummies into the battlefield to give them courage and have their ancestor give them their strength in combat. And that such a striking image. It's such a unique aspect of that civilization that we were how can we represent that in gameplay? And what we landed on was when a Getcha warrior dies, it heals the nearby Getcha warriors, kind of representing that idea that it becomes the ancestor giving strength to the other ones to fight even harder. We even have the mummies on the actual model of the units being carried on the battlefield. So those are all kind of different religious elements. Also the temple guards being a defender of the places of worship that there are many sanctuaries for the Muisca across their confederations, and the temple guard fighting harder the longer it stays in combat to really defend those temples and different sacred places for the Muisca. With the Muisca, we really had those two main pillars of the civilization, and it kind of flowed really naturally into each different elements really relates to one or the other, and we ended up with a really compelling civilization it's a really rich civilization. You're going to have a ton of gold when playing at the Muisca, and then you're able to translate these riches into really strong, really powerful, but also expensive units in your Getcha warriors, your unique units, also arbalesters, siege onagers, those really powerful but expensive options that you really have to think about before investing into.
Yeah, I think it's actually interesting because we already have an American civilization that's known for its riches and powerful and expensive gold warriors with the Aztecs, but I do think that the Muisca feel quite different. So I think that part of it is that range focus, part of it's the regional unit aspect to it. But no, I think that the Muisca do feel pretty darn fun and unique. And something we haven't actually touched on yet is the Champi Warrior, the new regional unit. So why don't you just give a bit of an explanation onto, both from a history and a gameplay perspective, what is the point of the Champi Warrior?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting topic because the Champi. So when we decided to go with the South American theme, obviously, kind of the first question was, okay, what do we do about eagles? Do we just keep all those civilizations just the way Incas had access to eagles? Do we keep all of them with eagle available to them, and just accept that eagles are a bit out of place stand-in for all kind of like regional infantry, fast infantry units that are going to be acting out as your pseudo cavalry. But quite quickly, what we realized were, well, if we're going to go through all the length of making an actual South American DLC, we're going to make a new architecture for them. Well, we should really get rid of all the aspects that would be like ostensibly borrowed from the Mesoamericans. So pretty quickly we decided, okay, we're going to have something else other than eagles. And now the question was, what kind of design would be interesting for that? Obviously, it would be a fast melee infantry. That is what you need. If you don't have access to cavalry, you should have something that has some ability. But with that aspect, that's basically just eagles. So we decided that one interesting approach would be to combine the roles of the eagles and some of the roles of the militia line to create the Champi Warrior. The Champi itself just being a mace weapon that were very common in South America. Champi, name itself being an Inca word for the mace. And what we did was, okay, we're going to combine, how do we combine the different aspects of the Champi, the Eagle Warrior and the militia line into just one unit? Those are very different roles. So it's a tricky balancing act to put everything into one unit without making it just completely overpowered, because that's one unit that does everything. And one thing that was really helpful in actually creating the space for that unit to exist was also the existence of the Slinger alongside it, because with Slinger you have a unit that is really good against infantry, and as it turns out, one of the main roles of the militia line for the Mesoamerican Civ is fighting against other infantry, in particular shock infantry. So because you already have the Slinger to deal with those, then we can make the Champi much weaker in melee combats and really focus on the mobility and raiding aspects, knowing that some of the anti-infantry role, anti-shock infantry role will be taken on by the Slinger. And those kind of were the main elements that we picked from to make the Champi a unique aspect of those civilization. And I think we succeeded in making it very different from how you would view just an Eagle Warrior. It's not just a reskin Eagle Warrior. It's a unit that feels like it has its own niche, its own role, and its own unique playstyle that you really have to kind of think about when you're playing those American civilizations. It is a core aspect of them that, okay, you don't have the militia line, you don't have eagles, you have this unit that takes on some aspects of both of them and has some aspects of neither. And now you have to plan accordingly and use it wisely depending on which bonuses you have.
And you've got outposts. They get to build outposts, of course.
Yes.
Referencing their scouting capabilities, which I think is pretty neat. And now, Sebasthian, one more campaign, El Dorado. It's the three-sword campaign. It's probably going to be fairly complex. Tell us about why we went with El Dorado.
I think making a campaign about the Muisca that does not include El Dorado would be quite a missed opportunity. I mean, we already had one El Dorado campaign back in
about that later.
Yeah. We kind of wanted to do El Dorado justice, I guess, and partly to tell it from the lesser-known perspective, like from the Muisca perspective, rather than the Spanish one. It's just a really interesting story because we kind of combine both elements of history, but also like Muisca folklore. So the main character, Pacanchique, is a character from folklore who is interacts a lot with the main villain, who has the most complicated name out of all characters, Kemen Chatocha.
Oh boy.
Yes, good luck saying that in the playthroughs.
Yeah, thanks.
But yeah, he has a lot of interactions with him. Like in our story, he is a commander under Commander Tocha. And then at one point, again, minor spoiler, but it comes quite early in the story, he has the ability, or he gets the option of choosing who he's going to serve. Is he going to stay with Commander Tocha, or is he going to join the rival Nemekene? And the choice you make there kind of shapes the way the entire campaign plays out in gameplay. And it was just a really interesting way to construct a story, like taking some elements of folklore, some elements of history, and just finding the best way to blend it all into one quite compact story. Because a lot of Muisca history, when you go back, is just it's very focused on like the Muisca Confederation. You have these various power centers, and they kind of vie for domination against or with each other. They don't really expand that far. They're not quite conquerors in the way of like we would imagine here in Europe. They kind of stay in their heartland a lot of the time, fight against each other, and that makes it a bit difficult to make a campaign about like the earlier days. There are some elements you could use, but if you were to make a campaign about like the Muisca Confederation Wars, it would just be a like mirror match for 5 missions, which
we had that with Pachacuti, and I know that you guys wanted to go back and give a little bit more gameplay diversity there.
Yes, it's like having some diverse civilizations and just different things you can play against is just generally better. There were also just so many like interesting characters to pick up with the route we went for in the end. So you have some of the more famous ones are like Kemencha Tocha, who is historically he was seen as this kind of greedy, ugly king who it was not always very popular. And we kind of took that aspect and ran with it, turned him into a real larger-than-life villain in a way. And then you have Pakanchiki, kind of this folklore hero who becomes our protagonist. His main goal is really to save the love of his life, Aze, from Kemencha Tocha's grasp, which is again inspired by it's not a like word-to-word retelling of the myth, but it's inspired by that myth, folk tale.
We mentioned it previously, but we had the El Dorado campaign in the game back in HD. It was definitely seen as quite, gimmicky RPG, not focused on the Incas, who didn't really have anything to do with El Dorado in the first place. So, I mean, I get why you retooled it into Pachacuti, but are there aspects of that campaign that would also pop up again in this version of El Dorado? Like Maria and her sweet lips with the side quest you do in Cusco in the beginning.
Not really. I think we really tried to make a fresh start. So it's really just a new perspective on the same story. It's like gameplay-wise, there are some really like fun mechanics you're gonna play around with as you go through the campaign. But it's less of an RPG like the original campaign was, and more of the kind of gameplay you know and love from Age of Empires. You're build and destroy, but with like unique mechanics and unique situations every time. So yeah, not that many things that survive from the old El Dorado campaign, I would say.
Very sad.
You're not gonna get lost in the jungle for like 4 hours or
yeah. No full feudal age fights against your opponent where you're just having to run metadarms into town centers.
Well, you never know. No.
Well, so last thing here on El Dorado. How is the player able to use the Muisca civilization and all of their fancy, expensive gold units, and how does that create a sort of core part of the gameplay experience?
Again, because I haven't really been too involved in the level design, I'm not the best person to answer that.
I'm sorry, you're the only campaign guy we've got here.
Yes, I know.
I'm sure you're still more knowledgeable than Tristan here on the
I'm going to do my best.
The gameplay decisions.
But yeah, like Tristan mentioned, like the market bonuses and things are gonna like help you get your trade up quite quickly if you want to. And there are some missions where I feel like that can be a good route to go with for a strategy, just to get some good gold income that way. And like something I found like fun to do is just to place monasteries all over the place and try to spam those rather expensive temple guards, but it's just really a super nerdy thing, but just fun to see a military unit pop out of a like holy place, and then they stand around the temple defending it. I've
Ramp
played
up that
Age of
attack
Empires
speed, and
since
they
I
just
was-
like swing their giant clubs, just like.
yeah, and they just look really cool. And I mean, I've been playing Age of Empires since I was maybe 5 or 6 or something. So little things like that are just still cool. Still kind of give my inner child a bit of joy.
It's okay. We're all Age of Empires nerds here. We're allowed to have fun with the
Safe space.
the weird and interesting aspects of the game. But guys, that is going to be the Muisca and El Dorado campaign. Before we all sign off, I do have just a couple of closing questions for both of you, and we can jump back here to Tristan. And it's just, what did you enjoy the most about making this expansion? What really stood out to you in this process? As I know you've worked on a bunch of them.
I mean, I think really the main thing that was interesting here was exploring new uncharted terrain, making new American civilization. It's been like 13 years since the last one with Incas, and here we had the opportunity to not only do it again, but also kind of do it right, specifically for the Incas. So that's just a lot of fun to really dig into an aspect of like an entire region of the world that is uncharted, and we get to dig into the history and find which aspects are going to be the salient aspect of these civilizations. It's not actual design work, but like making a new architecture set was like incredible to like see it come together and really embody those civilizations, not just in the design but also in the visuals. So all the regional elements that we introduced really made those civilizations like come to life. Yeah, it's just a great part of like designing Age of Empires civilization is just going to some part of the world that hasn't been explored or has been underexplored until now, and finding all those like nuggets of history that you are like you can get a great idea of like, oh, I can make a good gameplay out of it. I can make something fun that the players are going to engage with, and in doing so, I'm able to represent a part of history, a part of like some peoples that was not represented before, and that's really rewarding, being able to tell those stories that not just in campaign but also in civilizations, tell the stories of some people that most people don't know about. Most people don't really know about the history of the Tupi, of the Muisca, maybe the Mapuche, but even then you have to be a history nerd to know about it. So that's really the fun part of making Age of Empires Civs, is to dig into some lesser known story at this point and flesh them out into something that the player are able to really relate and kind of become hopefully some of their favorite content.
I know that I'm really looking forward to it, and you can just tell all of the work that was done with the research and really trying to flesh out the new and interesting civilization. So definitely can feel that, at least from my perspective. But same question to you, Sebasthian. What to you was the most fun or interesting part of making this DLC? Because you've also worked on several at this point.
I mean, for me, it's always the stories and the characters and finding new stories to tell and unique perspectives. And in this case, it was also partly a challenge because all these stories are, at least to some extent, about like the contact between European colonizers and the local tribes, and how each civilization kind of handled the invasion and the threat of European colonization. So we try to really find 3 unique ways, both of telling the story and 3 different, I would say, like 3 different approaches that were taken by these tribes as well, kind of to make sure that each story is unique, and also to kind of cover the complexity of this interaction of different civilizations. So that was a lot of fun, and just bringing these characters to life and trying to see like how can we take this quite expansive story, like for example the Lautaro story that has a lot of different characters that spans over like 100 years. And like, how can we find a good like starting point, cutoff point, and how to make that as interesting as we can, and kind of try to tie some good character arcs in there as well, so it doesn't feel like, oh, this guy comes along and then he exits the scene and then we switch to another one. Try to really focus in on creating some good like heroes journeys for these stories, which I think is slightly different, at least from how we've done things in the past, where you have like you cycle between multiple protagonists sometimes, and other times when you look at like, for Genghis Khan, for example, you follow along with all of his conquests, and then he dies. So you capture the entire like arc of his career, but
yes, Genghis Khan's professional career.
Yes,
job description: world conqueror.
Yeah. But you kind of capture his entire career, which you kind of have to do when it's Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
But then in other cases where the story kind of just lends itself to a more natural, like dramatic curve, like you start from rock bottom, you have to work your way up, and then something really terrible happens, but you manage to overcome it and win in the end. And I feel like there is something like that in each of these three stories, which is kind of something we try to lean into, just making sure that it feels rewarding dramatically when you're playing through the stories.
Awesome. Well, before we head off here, Tristan, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about? And if not, or afterwards, give me some shout outs and goodbyes, man.
I just want to say I hope people enjoy playing with those civilizations and have as much fun playing with them as we have designing them, because this was really like I had incredible amount of fun making those civilizations, playing with them, balancing them. There is so much history that we were able to capture and that we were able to put into the game, and so much fun, new content, new gameplay, that I really hope people enjoy this DLC, because on our side, this was a really fun ride to make it happen.
All right, awesome. And Sebasthian, same thing. Anything else you wanted to cover before we sign off?
No, I can just echo what Tristan said. It's been a lot of fun creating these stories and kind of diving into this world that I didn't really know much about at all before we started on this project, but now I feel like I have a much better understanding. I hope that people really, obviously enjoy the campaigns, enjoy the stories, the characters, and really look forward to seeing what people think about the 3 new stories we're telling.
Well, all right. Thank you both so much. Hope you enjoyed this interview. And of course, everyone in the YouTube comments and watching, of course, be sure to let us know how you thought of it and what you think of this DLC. But thanks again. Huge thanks, actually, to both TriRem and Lord Basse here. Really appreciate it, guys. And I will see you all next time.